David, welcome to the show. Listen, mate, nice to have you on. Ministry of Regulation, it was meant to get rid of all the red tape. There's an allegation that it isn't. It's going exactly the other way. It's sort of becoming a rather enlarged, bloated bureaucracy. Your response?
Well, let's just listen first of all to what the criticisms are. There seem to be two. One is that it has 3 deputy chief executives at a pay rate of $250,000 to $350,000. And the second charge is that it has an average salary range for its 91 staff of $150,000. So I know there'll be people who will immediately say this is an outrage. The average bureaucrat only gets paid about $80,000. This is twice as much. You're supposed to be getting rid of red tape and regulation. How can you do this? So I absolutely understand all those criticisms. Now, let me introduce a bit more context. We looked up, there are 246 deputy chief executives across the public service in the same pay band. There are 6,500 officials who are paid more than $150,000. So let's just put this in perspective. We've got 3 out of 246 deputy chief executives. We've got a total of 91 people paid $150,000, but there's 6,500 of them across the government. Meanwhile, red tape and bureaucracy is at least a $5 billion a year problem. So I just put it to people, it is spending money, and the figures in isolation do sound large. But if you want to get on top of a government and a regulatory culture that's out of control, having 3 out of 246 chief executives working on actually cutting red tape instead of adding it, and having 91 people at that pay rate when there's another 6,500 out there getting paid more, I don't think is outrageous. And you also got to remember, the government's actually shrunk the size of the bureaucracy by about 6,000 already. So, we're talking about 91 people here. And I think when you put it in that perspective, you'd probably say there's nothing to see here. But as you say, the media have done everything they can to blow this up because they seem to have a bit of ACT derangement syndrome.
So the argument, I get it, is that it doesn't matter how many people we've got, actually. Not so much how many people, but what they're paid. If I can save $5 billion, a year or total out of the New Zealand economy from regulation and red tape, that's a wonderful investment. Is that the argument?
Yep. So if I look at, I'll give you an example. I mean, the Ministry for Regulation has a budget of $16 million. I'll just add that none of the people that they're talking about have actually been hired. I mean, they only know this because we've started advertising, so they don't even exist yet. But, putting that aside, they will exist one day. If they could reduce the regulatory burden, that $5 billion a year, by even 1%, that would be a $50 million a year saving, and they'd be paying themselves off 3 times over. So, I think what it really tells me is that there's a lot of sensationalism, there's a lot of beating up, but our media doesn't have the capability to analyse and debate real problems that we face as a country.
You're always reported at the end, usually, of an article after everybody else has had a go, as if there's some balance from that. You still think or consider that the mainstream media have it in for you guys?
Sorry, can you just say that again?
Sure. You're always reported, David, if your response is reported. It's always at the end of an article, so you've got to read through the whole thing to get to the end before you're there. So it's never right at the start, and all the criticism comes before that. Is this the common... I mean, you expect this to carry on for the next 2 years? This is the way you'll be treated?
Yeah, I've noticed a bit of that lately. But, what I also know is that there's such a thing in the world as equilibrium. And, the more biased the media becomes, the more people expect scepticism and willingness to read to the end grows. So, it's a shame that they often behave the way that they do. But there's another equilibrium, which is that they're running out of money and people are turning to other sources of information. So if you look, for example, at what the media say, they say, it's because the internet has made it harder for us to make money and everyone's going to Google and Facebook and so on. Well, that may be true, but actually, as the platform demonstrates, the internet has generated new ways of reaching audiences and made journalism easier than ever. It's not like you have to print a whole lot of paper with black ink on dead trees in the middle of the night and then have paper boys deliver it to people's letterboxes to get the news out. I mean, you just push a button now. So actually, if you have a good product, the internet is a great opportunity, but it doesn't seem to be working for the legacy media. And a cynical person might say, maybe that's because you don't have a good product.
Okay, New Zealand First have a very similar view on that issues too. I'm interested, therefore, in Paul Goldsmith, just on apropos that, thinking of carrying on with Willie Jackson's bill to do with the bailout of the mainstream media, and particularly getting Google and Facebook and others to somehow charge them money or pay a fee, a negotiated fee. Are you supportive of that legislation, or because I think inherently or instinctively, David, you'd be pretty sceptical?
Well, actors invoked the agree to disagree on that. We've said we won't support it. We've said to National and New Zealand First, you guys want to go for it, you go for it. See if you can get Labor to vote for it too. And National and New Zealand First have agreed with that in Cabinet. Whether or not they'll actually get Labor over the line for it, I don't know. But what I am quite sure about is that you're not going to solve the problem by making Facebook and Google give money to companies that don't actually have a good product in the first place.
Listen, you're not going to get too much argument from me on that one. Last week we talked about Transpower, and obviously I can just tell you now, it's raining all over the South Island except where the lakes are, David, and there doesn't appear to be any climatic relief in sight. Can I ask, Winston went down, Winston Pulp and Paper, 240 jobs. They're coming to the government saying, listen, we've got a temporary crisis, can we get some temporary assistance? I gave the example of bailing out Air New Zealand during COVID as an example before. We subsidised currently and heavily subsidised over decades now TY Point. Is there an argument to be made for the government actually playing a temporary role in this electricity crisis?
No, because governments can delay change, but they can't halt it. The reality is that until it becomes more attractive to invest in energy, the price is going to be high, and it's going to be very difficult to attract investment in areas like pulp and paper, because basically to most of the world economy, it doesn't matter where you are doing your pulp or your paper or your sawmilling. The question is, how much is labour, how much is electricity, how much is transport? Well, transport's probably against us. So then you come back to electricity and labour. Labour, we actually want people to get paid more. So then all that's left is the cost of energy. So, that's a fundamental. And the government trying to prop up an industry when the fundamentals are against it. Well, we've been down that route, and people eventually realise, in the case of agriculture, that you can't subsidise your largest industry. I remember this as a child when people said farming's the backbone of New Zealand, but we're subsidising it. I said, well, how can you what's holding up the backbone if you're subsidising it?